I just listened to every album by the band Spirit, and here are my thoughts. So Spirit is a kind of psychedelic rock band who enjoyed modest success in the late 60s and early 70s, but I think the one main thing that they're famous for is for a lawsuit against Led Zeppelin. So on their very first album, they had a song called Taurus, which has several bars of notes that are nearly identical to the first several bars of Stairway to Heaven. That is the only thing that I knew about Spirit before getting into it. I did not know really any of these songs. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first and main iteration of Spirit lasts for only 2 years, and it's 4 albums. So their first 4 albums, which were called Spirit and The Family That Plays Together, both released in 1968. Then in 69 you have Clear, and then in 1970 you have The 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus. It's the last album with this kind of original lineup. These 4 albums are incredibly consistent all throughout. It's just good song after good song. One of their primary songwriters, Randy California, I think he just has an ear for melodies, and it's especially showing in these early albums. If I could say one criticism that I have about Spirit in general, and especially these first 4 albums where they really had a chance to make it big, I would say that the main criticism would be they don't really have a signature sound. There were several songs that popped up where I'd say, oh, that kind of sounded like The Doors, or oh, that kind of sounded like Pink Floyd, or oh, that kind of sounded like Sgt. Pepper's. But there weren't any songs that just sounded like Spirit. And if I had to guess, I think that's the main reason why we don't look back at them as a legendary rock band today. Honestly, though, I enjoyed most of the songs from these albums. So from the first album, a couple of songs pop into mind, like Fresh Garbage was a fun song. Straight Arrow was one that I really liked. Of course, Taurus is a very pretty short instrumental song. Girl in Your Eye is another one from this album that I'd really liked. And then their second album, it starts off with a song called I Got a Line on You, and I think that's the biggest hit single that they ever had. A lot of other good songs on this album, though. I love Darlin' If. That was another main standout of this. And then songs like Dream Within a Dream really showed up to me. Clear, the third album, I think is the weakest of the bunch. Still really good, though. Among the many good songs on this album, So Little Time to Fly, Truckin', the title track also it stood out to me. But it's their fourth album, The 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus, that I think is the best of the 4. It and The Family That Plays Together were really neck and neck for the top spot there, but ultimately it went to The 12 Dreams. This album has Nature's Way, which was a live staple for them, kind of like a song that became a cult classic, if you will, with the band. But Animal Zoo is another song that really stood out to me. Streetworm and Life Has Just Begun were a couple of other main standouts, but again, entire album was just really high quality music. Now, unfortunately, the band has a sharp downturn from here. So in 1972, they released an album called Feedback. This is the only Spirit album that does not feature Randy California. Thankfully, it does get better from here. This is one of my least favorite albums in their entire discography. But there just weren't really any standout songs on this album to me. Now the band goes on hiatus for a few years and then comes back and releases an album called Spirit of 76, which was released in, you guessed it, 1975. Randy California is back, as he will be for the rest of the discography. He has Ed Cassidy with him on drums, who is the only original member that stays with him for, I think, every album moving forward. There might be 1 or 2 outliers in there. I'd have to double check. Now, I have seen some comments insist that Spirit of 76 is their best album or one of their best albums. I personally did not hear that. Not that it was a bad album, but it didn't stand out to me nearly as much as their first 4. It's a double album, so there's a lot of songs here, and there are few songs that I think justified the length of the album. Sunrise, I thought was a pretty good song. When, I thought was also a pretty good song. Happy was also a pretty nice song. One thing that I think kind of handicapped this album is that its far and away best moments are just covers of Bob Dylan songs, especially Like a Rolling Stone. This would be my favorite Spirit song if it wasn't a cover of a Bob Dylan song. It's a great cover, though. So, just mini recap. They had Feedback, which is like way down at the bottom of my list. Then they have Spirit of 76, which is coming up towards the middle. And then in the same year, 1975, they release Son of Spirit, which I consider in between the two. So it's a considerable step down even from Spirit of 76. Honestly, I think Circle is the only song from this album that had really stood out to me in any way. Then they had released Farther Along in 1976, which was of similar quality as Son of Spirit. There were a couple more somewhat standout tracks, but overall it had just kind of just run together the way that Son of Spirit did. So like Colossus was one of those somewhat standout tracks, and then Don't Lock Up Your Door and then Once With You were a couple others. Future Games comes next in 1977, and this is kind of a collage album, or what's typically called a collage album. So it's kind of, a lot of short songs, melody after melody, and they don't focus so much on developing the melodies that they have. They have something good, they form it, so you end up with song after song that's like between 1 and 2 minutes long. Normally, I would consider going all in on that style a pretty heavy risk, but I actually really liked this album. This is one of those Spirit albums that came somewhat close to reaching up towards the top 4 of my list. Stars Are Love, Kahana Dream, and Buried in My Brain were 3 tracks that stood out to me a bit from this album. But like I said, it's a collage album. It's better if you just listen to it all the way through. Then in 1981, they release The Adventures of Captain Copter and Commander Cassidy in Potato Land. From here on out, I'm just going to call it Potato Land. And this did end up being my least favorite Spirit album. It had little jingles here and there. It really tried to be a concept album. So I'm almost wondering if they could just make like a silly movie out of it. There was one song called Turn to the Right that I thought was okay from this, but for the most part, it's just kind of wacky amalgamation of random stuff that's been put together. In 1984, they released an album called The 13th Dream. Some people consider this to be their next studio recording, but there's only 3 original songs on it. Everything else is re-recorded hits from their previous days. So Pick It Up was one original song from this album that had stood out to me. But yeah, otherwise it's, the other 2 original songs were just okay, and it's all just re-recordings. So we're at their last few albums now, and they do make what I think is a pretty modest comeback. So Rapture in the Chambers comes up next, 1989. Hello, dogs. It's not like I love this album, but it is at least a considerable step up from Potato Land. So a few songs in here, and Enchanted Forest really stuck out to me. The title track was also really good. And then there was another song called Thinking Of, which I also liked reasonably well. So 1 year later, in 1990, they released Tent of Miracles, and this might be a controversial statement, but Tent of Miracles is my favorite Spirit album aside from the first 4 original lineup albums. Love From Here, the title track Tent of Miracles, California Band, a few others. Like they made this album really enjoyable to listen to. I just had to double check. Deep in This Land and Covered Wagons were the other 2 that I was trying to remember as big standout tracks from this album here. Now, a bit later in 1996, they released an album called California Blues, and this is the last album that they would release with Randy California still alive. Now, half of this album are covers. It is a very bluesy album. You can tell he was in that very bluesy space. There were a couple of good original songs on here, the title track being one. The River and Call on Me were other big standouts to me on this album. The River especially. It sounds like a really classic gospel song, but the lyrics make it clear it's not about Jesus. It doesn't seem to be about anyone specific, but it channels kind of that energy of classic gospel, which I really like. A month after this album's release, Randy California loses his life in a riptide, successfully saving his son. So there's that, but he does lose his life in the process. 2 main posthumous releases. One is called Sons of America. It is like 3 hours of unreleased demos. Honestly, really, really good here. Really good material here. The album is just too long, but really good individual songs to pick out. And then Model Shop, which does include the original lineup, but it was a soundtrack, so lots of ambient stuff. A couple of drum solos if you're into that. There is my album ranking. The first 4 are Essential Classic Spirit. Tent of Miracles and Future Games are 2 albums that I came away with pretty positive opinions about. Spirit of 76 down to California Blues are albums that I had relatively meh feelings about. You know, I didn't love them. I didn't think they were amazing, but they had, you know, a couple of songs to grab and hold on to and put onto a playlist. And then the bottom two, Feedback and Potato Land, are albums that I actually had pretty negative opinions about. That's it. Thank you for watching.